You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-commerce strategy, technology and CX-focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and Replatforming specialists James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-commerce strategy and leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This podcast is sponsored by WorldPay, and we've got a really useful topic that we're going to talk about today, and I'll introduce the guests in a moment and let them introduce themselves. But looking at what role an e-com consultant plays in website migrations and where they add value. Now, I'm an independent consultant. I've been doing this for years. Paul, who's not on the podcast today, and I have worked on many projects together, and hence why I brought into the senior people from his team who do this role across a wide range of clients. Because what we wanted to talk about is why do consultants exist, and when do you need them, when you don't? But more importantly, what are the things that can go wrong in projects if you don't have somebody who's got the expertise? So a warm welcome to Sham and Frankie today. How are you, ladies?
Good, thank you. First podcast.
I know, this is exciting. You're going to love it. You're going to want to do more podcasts after this, Frankie. I guarantee it.
We finally got our spanking about work. It's just taken a while, but don't worry, we've got her.
Yes. So for those listeners, Sham and I have talked about this many, many times, and I never got around to organising it because I'm useless. So now we're actually talking about this. So before we get into the questions, and for those listening, what we're going to talk about today are things about the classic issues people face in teams, the knowledge gaps and how like a consultant can help the teams work better, the skills you need from a consultant. Because if you are planning to spend money on a consultant, you need to know you've got the right skill set and not just bringing somebody in for the sake of it. So we're going to a lot of really valuable things. But let's go first in terms of introducing who you are and what you do and your sort of brand you've worked with.
I'll start. I'm Sham, Operations Director at Vervaunt, although that title is not really true. I've been here since the start, so I've just been given a label. I work on the e-com side of the business, and we do a variety of services on our side, including migrations, which is probably the biggest service that we do, or at least like most commonly known one that we do. Full managed service end to end of replatforming projects. And I've now stepped down from delivery only last year, but although we do get dragged into some of them. And then we've got Frankie on my team, but I'll let Frankie introduce herself.
I'm Frankie, ecom consultant on the Vervaunt team. I've been here for just over 4 years. So my role really crosses over all of our services. So from audits to retainers, redesigns and replatforms as well. Some of the clients that we work with include Timex, Stussy, Oka, Frankie Shop. So it really goes across loads of different verticals, but predominantly the premium fashion, beauty and lifestyle space.
Yeah, this is why I think today's going to be a really fun conversation, because I work in slightly different client bases, although there is some crossover. And I have worked with Vervaunt on a few projects over the years, but I think that breadth across different business types is really useful for people to understand. But let's set the scene first. I think it'd be useful because how do you approach replatforming? I know one of the things I really like about Vervaunt is its point of difference in the market and the skill set it brings rather than a traditional agency. So do you want to talk about what is your viewpoint and approach to replatforming projects?
On replatforms as well, I think the thing that we speak about a lot is, agencies try to do this structured and standardized approach, right? And there's general 80-20 rule when it comes to any project, because we have to allow for scaling, right? But what we often find end up happening is every project is probably more like 20-80, and like 80% of it is custom, just because of the wants, needs, goals and requirements from every customer. And the different verticals might also add in another layer of complexity that we also need to consider. Every project is so different that we can't actually cut and paste anything. So you're starting from like zero. Not starting from far from zero anyway for every project that we end up taking on. Frankie's probably got a bit more like detail on our approach once we've actually engaged with the customer.
Yes, I think one of the key ways that we definitely do stand out is that we really try to get a true understanding of the client's end goal, so that we can really shape the project end to end. So that for us, that means actually really getting a clear view of the team, exactly who we're working with, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the internal challenges as well. So we do actually spend quite a long time getting to know the team, really understanding actually the challenges that each department has as well, because that will also help us to consult in a lot more transparent way. One of the ways that we do that is by doing a detailed requirements gathering at the beginning. So that actually goes beyond just doing a Moscow document. It's really actually in-person sessions, sitting with the teams to establish exactly what they're trying to achieve across the different departments, why different teams actually see the value in a migration. And that way we can give an accurate and transparent view in terms of timeline and budget. And actually, one of the things I missed is that we are really transparent with the client in terms of what they are going to get and what they're not going to get for their budget as well. So we're quite clear on what the scope allows, and we will definitely try to give them a realistic assessment of that.
Yeah, I think what I always find interesting with replatforming projects is when people go direct to an agency, but they haven't done what I call the pre-discovery, which is basically what you've just articulated, is the speed and time it takes for an agency to catch up with understanding the framing of a project in order to be able to then do proper technical discovery, which is the functional specification work. There's that pre-bit where you actually refining and you get the customer, the client, in the right headspace to understand what the project is to them, what their framing is and what's driving it and how they're going to measure the success. Because I know that you guys see this as well, and I've seen a lot of projects where there isn't an internal consensus, and that will just create a muddled technical discovery of an agency. And that for me is one of the most critical parts before any discovery starts.
The thing is, like, customers don't know what they don't know. And I think this is where the value is of using a consultancy or an agency. And I don't mean agency dev side. I mean an independent, managed service agency, because it makes teams think about things in detail, and only once that thought's on paper can you understand like a timeline for that specific area. And I think this is the big thing, is the education piece. Like, what we usually get from a customer when we first speak to them is a timeline and a budget. How can you give me a timeline on something that we don't have sight of? So this is what we're kind of doing, is like educating them through, like, right, you want this, let's work back from launch day. These are the things that we need as a part of this delivery. This is what it realistically looks like. If you need that to be delivered faster, fine. But this is then what a version of that looks like. It's getting them to agree on what that picture looks like end to end up front. And that pre-discovery is so, so important, because again, where they don't know what they don't know, it's usually after something's been signed. So proposals then agreed. You then go into a tech discovery with a dev agency, but only then are you having your first conversation, but you've already signed a proposal. So what have you signed? And I don't think that is right out there in the sphere as a point. And, then that's where the expectation, or the lack of expectation and understanding kind of comes into play, and people get disappointed, right? Because they've signed off a project delivery, and sometimes I don't even think they know that they're not getting their content loaded for them. Like, that's what you'd expect, right? You've paid an agency to build your website. You think they're building a website, but I think what honestly happens is that they're building a theme. And I think that, like, lack of understanding and lack of education to a customer really, like, starts creating friction from day one.
Ready to grow your business online? With WorldPay e-commerce, you can deliver fast, secure payments your customers love, backed by global reach and real people-powered support. Scale with confidence and enhance your customers' experience with WorldPay e-commerce.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point here, is that so many people are moving from legacy tech into modern stacks, and regardless of what that may be. And I know you do a lot of work with Shopify, but you've worked with other platforms as well, whether it's a Shopify, Centra, or a commerce site, whoever it might be. And they take historical thinking into a new one. And you're right, if you don't have that expectation set, you get to the point where fragmented relationships occur because the expectation is completely out of line. And then also people get pissed off because they go, why are you charging me for this? Surely that should have been part of the core project. And it's critical to nail that down.
Yeah. Also, often there's a line item for PM. I'm completely derailing this, aren't I? But there's a line item for PM from a dev agency side. That PM's actually to filter in their dev resource, and they're a client-facing person, yes, but they're not here to PM your internal team and your management of your deliverables. They're there to manage the web team's deliverables. And I think that lack of clarity already, from the offset, again, creates that friction. And the full point of having like a managed service team and consultancy is to be able to like minimize that friction, create more of a seamless process end to end. And yeah, it's just, again, like I said, it's lack of education. We do migrations like in our sleep now, but it's taken a while to get here. And even then, like I said, it's 80-20. There's times that we're even thrown in some projects because of a big gap that we find, like after scoping, you still find like little errors of when something's too broad or too open in terms of scope. That's when it obviously just creates more noise. But yeah, we've had issues. I guess across, there's not a seamless project we've had. There'll be something that's happened alongside a project that takes, a couple of weeks to like unpick.
Yeah, I don't think a seamless project exists. I think this is why it's so important to have that frame at the start. Every conversation I start with a new client, whether I'm doing an end-to-end like you guys or whether I'm just doing some consultancy around tech selection and agency selection, is you're going to have problems. The platform won't be perfect. You're not going to fix all your problems. You're going to discover new ones. What are you willing to compromise and not? Because you have to have that conversation. Otherwise, people go in thinking switching tech solves problems. And then other stakeholders in the business, whether it's customer service or retail, get really pissed off because the tech hasn't done what somebody has told them will do. And we all know that vendors, love them because they add a lot of value in many ways. But there's a lot of overzealous salespeople out there who will tell you it will do everything.
Yeah.
From an agency perspective, though, as well, it feels from the dev agency perspective, obviously their goal is to read a spec and to make sure that they deliver against the spec. So where we come in is to make sure that actually we are picking holes in that and actually really trying to understand why someone is trying to do a particular feature or particular functionality. Is it actually going to be beneficial to the business? So that's why we do sit in the discovery sessions as well with the agency. And it does, personally, I find it does take us a little bit of time to actually get the whole team of a client on board to how we add the value. And when they've seen us in a couple of sessions, they then fully understand how we add the value. And obviously, we've bridged the gap between the two.
Yeah, I think that's the most salient point here is plugging gaps, because we all know it. These projects are complex. They involve people and technology are screwed. It's just, we all are. The question is, how do you minimize that screwiness so that you minimize disruption and you keep projects on time and on budget? And actually, let's expand on the classic issues clients face, because Sham, you touched on one of the most salient ones where I keep having these conversations with people about their budgets and PM and the expectation that we'll just actually, we're going to give it to Jane. She's going to look after the project, right? But she's not a PM. Yeah. She's not to econ PM, and she hasn't done a replatforming. You've now added a massive risk to your business. You need to budget. If you don't have an internal PMO, you need to budget for a specialist, a contractor to come in for a period of time. And people underestimate it. They get given a TCO model from somebody that's totally undercooked, and then that creates inefficiency. So that is one of the areas. What else are you both seeing in terms of issues client teams face?
I mean, just to re-emphasize this, like, again, they don't know what they don't know. So it's like not having true clarity on what they have today versus what they need is a really big point. Again, we've done this a number of times. So we've seen we can figure out immediately based on the initial requirements that they might have in play or the goals that they want to do. The first thing we ask is, what size is your team? But I'll let Frankie maybe speak more on this, just on the day-to-day pulling. But yeah, they don't have true clarity on what it is that they have, never mind what they need.
And I think internal teams will not have the end-to-end view of the levers to pull. And I think that's definitely where we would add the value. The other issue which you mentioned is that most teams have not actually managed a migration before. So they actually have no idea what is to come, and all of the dependencies, the workload involved. And we more often than not get a team who has an ecom manager leading the project internally. And that is obviously really challenging. They've got their day-to-day job to do as well. So it is also our role to educate on that. Another thing which kind of plays into that is stakeholder management. So a lot of people leading the project internally will not have the authority to tell people what to do. So, for example, as an internal leader of this project, you will have to manage upwards, and you might actually have to pull in your head of IT, your head of finance, and it's quite difficult for those people and often to tell people what to do, to meet strict deadlines, etc. So we can often be that person to lean on, to be the person who shouts in a meeting, essentially.
Cool.
Carrot and stick.
Yeah, exactly.
Neither you're going to call it Karen, but yes, that's that as well. Just on top of that as well, that what issues do they face? I think it's not necessarily again something that they know they face, but accountability is like the number one thing that I try and force from the first meeting. So everyone has to be in the meeting who's involved in either decision making or executing together. All cameras have to be on for that initial meet. Like I need to eyeball people, make sure that they're engaged. But that accountability piece is huge, and like we run different like weeklies and then monthly steer calls. And again, that pulls in that accountability or reinforces that accountability in a project. But again, back to that budget piece, the lack of understanding and knowing how far that budget can actually take them and what they can get for it is a huge thing as well. So yeah, again, people will usually lean on us to allocate the budget accordingly, just to make sure that all the requirements or like launch critical requirements are met. Like often than none, GTM tracking, SEO, two massive deliverables in any migration are usually not on the table, and they are a separate cost. We often try to outsource that, so we don't have the skill set in the team to handle even if they're not SEO project might not necessarily be big, but the issues that can happen with SEO if you don't do it correctly, we can't take on that accountability with what our timings are internally as well. So we usually outsource that. But things like that aren't even on people's radars. So yeah, we kind of force that kind of true end-to-end safe, risk-free delivery as a part of this as well. But they don't know the issues until they go live, right? So we just bring that forward.
Yeah, the word is governance, basically, and Paul and I laugh about this a lot because I'm quite dull. I love governance, whereas he's obviously yeah. We could be dull. Yeah, that's why Paul's not on the podcast. He would have fallen asleep when we talk about the governance side. So, but this to me is a critical bit, and I think this is where a lot of client teams do not have the understanding, because you're right. The ownership there needs to be a senior decision maker who's at the C-suite, at the top table, who has the authority to make decisions and make people dedicated to project delivery. Because without that, people won't, because their priorities are elsewhere. That is critical. But it's the classic racy stuff, isn't it? Is you know that every project, regardless of size, has specific roles that have to be satisfied. It just depends how big the stakeholder set is and who gets assigned, and whether one person has 3 roles or each role is a different person, and then how you manage it. And if that's not defined up front, and people aren't briefed on it and have bought into it and have been told they need to follow this, that's when it unravels later on.
Yeah.
It's good to be dull.
Do you know what? Frankie is an exceptional level of compliant, and we need it. It's in our team, we've got scrappy and really strict in terms of governance and process. And I think the mix is really valuable to us. However, obviously we lean towards a more documented side of things. But yeah, not every client's the same, not every team structure is the same, and not every team needs that level of governance. But I guess the stuff that we've been seeing over the last couple of years, it's just more stakeholder management. So we do need that kind of level of care and due diligence.
There's,
I think.
Sorry. There's a balance as well between following a RACI and following you must do this and you must do that, with a bit of hand holding and having empathy for the fact that most people wouldn't have done this before, and they need that kind of pre-step to actually educate them into why. And we found that actually to be the most effective, because just dictating, obviously, via a RACI, it is important, but the hand-holding bit is also really key to make sure you get the buy-in, because that is the hardest part, I think.
I completely.
We're humans and they're humans, and these you have to allow space for that conversation as well.
Yeah, I completely agree that. I guess I always come back to the point that I think the level of governance should never be compromised in any project. How you execute it and how you manage people and how you communicate, obviously 100%, it varies massively depending on the style and structure. But also, I think one of the hard challenges for consultants is you're coming into an existing culture. You've got to work, you said at the start, both of you, that you've got to work within an existing team. You've got to understand, you've got to fit in seamlessly so you don't disrupt it. But equally, you've got to counter negative behavior that will disrupt a project by pointing out to them that won't work and why it won't work. And you've got to do it in a collaborative way so that people don't feel like you're saying you're rubbish. It's got to be very much like, look, let me help you succeed here, but this is going to cause us a problem. Here's why. How do you find that? Because I think that's the delicate balancing act.
Do you think we're paid enough, James?
No comment, Your Honour. I think that'd be a little bit of self-promotional if I answered that question.
Just from my perspective, I think it's about, again, showing the evidence of why someone needs to be accountable for certain things. So that would come from having a very clear layout of the milestones. So I'm just thinking, for example, integrations. On a migration, obviously that is a high risk area, particularly if they're bringing in a new middleware, for example. Usually, without stereotyping, the IT teams of a brand are not super well connected to the ecom teams. So there might be a kind of a little bit of a breakdown in communication there, where two teams are kind of working in silo. I guess our role is to make sure that we're bringing the evidence as to why it's important for teams to collaborate and work together. And that would come from the milestones and making sure that they are aware that if certain deadlines aren't met, then the rest of them essentially won't happen. So
and just to reinforce that, we then force them into a steer call and make them give an update on their area so that the accountability piece is brought back in. So it's a bit of a two-pronged approach, because I guess the communication piece, it can always be blamed on that, but you have to be in the room and be present as a part of a project. That's what you're committed to when you're using us, basically.
Yeah, and I think one of the skills a consultant needs to bring into a project is, it comes back to that project management and governance bit, is knowing when somebody hasn't got the strength to do what is expected of them in a project, and instead of basically hanging them out to dry, trying to support them and get them up to speed, but also from a steering point of view with the project lead, not the sponsor, but the project lead internally, explaining to them what the problem is and what the impact's going to be, so that they can make a decision on whether that person needs their role pushed to somebody else or they need somebody helping them. Because you will find people who just, it's not about age or junior or senior, it's about capability, and not everyone has the capability to execute in these projects.
Yeah. And I also think actually it's about understanding how your area impacts everyone else as well, because a lot of departments do work in silo and brands. It is quite shocking, but a lot of teams don't actually talk to each other internally. And I think it's quite easy, if you're doing a day-to-day job, to just think, I'll get to that, when I can. And so I think it's about us at the beginning helping to educate the whole team. And that's why we do sit with every single stakeholder and talk to them on like a personal level, and then also about the project.
One of the areas I wanted to chat about is areas that surprise clients in terms of how much they've got to do and actually how long it takes to get it delivered in a project, and how that can screw up development milestones. Because you touched on it earlier, I think, Sham, you said about people surprised, we got to do the content migration, the product data. So I'm not talking about like true data migration, customers' orders, but it's that content in, content audits, what we put in, what's fit for purpose. We're updating designs. Look, we've got to reposition images. All that lifestyle stuff's no longer fit, or we need new mobile cuts. And then it's product data. We've got to redo our product model because it's not fit for purpose in the new platform. And we've got to We've got to improve all of the structured data because we're trying to make it fit for future search and discovery. You suddenly put that on someone's table and that's like mind blown. Yeah. How do you guys approach that, and how would you help and support? Because that is a big piece of work if you're in like thousands of products territory.
Shall I start? Yeah. So depending on where we picked up the client project, because it could be at various stages, right? So they're only just assessing what they need, and they've come to us very early on, so we can plan from very early on. But just say the proposal has been signed with the agency and we're in full flight mode, and they've agreed to do a project with us. We have like maybe a 200 line item Asana board of tasks that need to be done for building a base project end to end. Now that board keeps us in check for things to happen in a logical order in a series. And obviously projects vary, right, in terms of complexity. So we'll take like a kind of like at least a kind of a semi-complex international project here. So 200 line items. What we would do is kind of run through our ways of working with the client very early on. So as soon as we start onboarding, it's a part of that process. And we show them the depth of things that are needed. And I think that initial call, yes, it might scare them a little bit, it might throw them, but it's like, don't get overwhelmed by what you're seeing. It is just that I need you all to understand the breadth of what I'm going to need from you across the whole project. And I'll explain as we go along, as we onboard as well, the level of input that I'm going to need from each team. But it kind of gives them a bit of a painting of a picture at that stage. So I think from the offset, they know like these guys are serious. There's quite a bit to do. And this isn't just, you can drop me a line, towards the end of the project and I'll just jump in. It's from the offset of a project. And so our ways of working will cover various high risk items as well. So that's just covering the broad project. We'll then pull in specific teams. So we as a team at Vervaunt, we focus and love actually managing like the product migration, for example, because we will fully optimize it for a client. So you'll end up having like loads of stuff in there in the back end that you don't want. You've gained it's all legacy product, legacy collections, and people haven't redirected stuff to the right places, haven't got rid of discontinued products. So we will do like a big data cleanse project on any on our usual projects, and then support a client to kind of do that data cleanse, really understand their product, optimize our filters, optimize their meta field structure, all these things that we'll work on. So that's one type of a project. Another one would be like for us to really work backwards from delivery. So the content plan, that is, we start that as early as possible as well in a project. And we will separate out the content team essentially. So that's assets, copy, metadata, and make sure that every single URL on the site is accounted for, working with the SEO team that this company will have. And then like we'll basically focus on making sure that content team are owning every single URL that's about to go live at the end of the deadline, and basically painting the picture internally about what it is that they want. That automatically allows them to start thinking of the design phase in a completely different approach, because they're like, right, I'm actually accountable to fill every single gap or every single bit of that design phase. Because usually the content teams are like, they might see a Figma file, but like within months after it's been built, and it's like you should really bring them along the journey, because it helps them also create that kind of creative view of like what we actually want for launch, and it's a good way to kind of create that accountability. But that's two big areas that I can just think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I'll let like Frankie maybe jump in, because I can see you nodding along.
No, I think the two big things there are planning and I guess taking the thinking away from a client in a way. So we have a lot of documentation that has been kind of tweaked and finessed over time from doing loads of these projects, understanding where the downfalls are. So now we do bring the content conversation, as Sham mentioned, to the beginning of the project. So even before we started the design phase, teams are a little bit confused, kind of saying, but I don't know what the designs are going to be, so how can I plan the content? I guess the biggest thing there is actually look at the content you already have. Will you need to redo everything? Are you planning on refreshing certain assets? Are you already planning on redoing your copy? By getting them to start thinking about that stuff initially, when they do go into the design phase, like Sham mentioned, they already know that they need to then go back and understand, okay, do I need to redo all of my product images, for example? And yeah, the product architecture as well is something we talk about at the very, very first session. So I guess for us, it really all it's about planning and making sure that the team is aware from the start, so that every single discovery session we have loops back to those key high risk areas, like the product, like the content, integrations, for example.
There are two other areas I want to get into, specifically around like knowledge gaps and ability to execute it to high standards and get the right outputs. So the first is technical discovery and second is UAT. So let's focus on technical discovery first, because one of the risks to a client is if they don't have the ability to scrutinize solution design being passed back, that they could accept a solution design that isn't optimal, that's going to maybe make their ways of working more complex than they'd ideally did, or they're having to buy in additional third parties and apps that they don't actually need to do because there's a cleaner way of doing it. So where do you think, from a consultancy point of view, that responsibility sits in order to get clients to get the best out of a discovery rather than just accepting what's given to them?
That is super interesting, because again, really depends on what has come in. So yeah, what stage a clients come in the pipeline for us, I guess. Because some also have potentially like a CTO sitting in there, or somebody quite technical who has created a bit of a framework of requirements that they think they're going to need for this project. And it's our job to basically go in there and still do our evaluation and our pre-discovery if it's possible within the timeline, so that we can validate exactly, we can validate their approach and validate our version of approach. And I think like it is interesting when, again, a client is paying a dev agency usually to build a website, which would include all of the apps and all the tech usually, right? And just from an assumption perspective. So like it's our job then to go in and make sure that the client is really aware of what they're getting when they're doing the migration. And to be fair, there's I think now, I'm saying nowadays, but you know, Shopify, for example, is one of our like larger, I guess, platforms of use within the company. Maybe about 60% of our clients are already on it or moving to it. And it comes up more often than none. And that one's super interesting specifically because I guess there's people that just understand the wider ecosystem, and they'll understand apps in the way that Shopify is configured, versus like the Magento world where you don't really understand how the website's put together, right? It's not as friendly for like the normal person to hack away at the back end and kind of deliver something on the front end, right? So I think I've completely lost my train of thought. What was your actual question on this? We're gonna have to start again on that one. But we'll go back.
So the question where I was coming at it on this is that if you haven't been through lots of replatforming, you don't know how to run just technical discovery workshops with agency. You don't know how to make sure the agency has covered all the important questions. And you see this around like product data, for example, not scrutinizing specific parts of a PDP. They actually have really complexity to the schemas and attributes that sit behind it. And then when looking at solution design, not knowing whether that is optimal. Like, you know, you're telling us we need to use this custom middleware, and you've got telling us there's 3 apps, but I don't actually know, is that the best way of doing it? Or are there better ways that will make our day-to-day processes easier? I think it's like, that's where I was coming from on that question is what is the role of the consultant in advising, guiding, and helping clients get better decisions?
Well, I think like the whole point that they've got a consultant in or an agency in is to be able to lean on their technical expertise, right, to be able to give them the answers. So I think what we would often do, even if there was, I guess, a framework or like an intentional apps list or technical scope put together, we would still go in and validate it and try and break it down. So the thing that we try to do is, like I would review a tech stack or an apps list and essentially try and find them the most agile or I guess most popular, or say popular by usage, because we do a lot of tech discovery and play about a lot of apps. We know a lot of emerging tech. And when we see like certain products that are being used or certain customization route for a bit of tech, I think we can pretty much between our team like summarize whether that's a good fit or not. And again, like I said, the whole Shopify world, that ecosystem, if somebody's choosing platform as Shopify, we'd be like, right, I'd rather you use a product that's within the ecosystem because, you know, it's tried and tested, it's a community, it will be better for you in the long run, unless they're a complex business, right? And again, it comes down to this pre-discovery and us really being in and on the ground in the business to fully understand it and knowing where they're trying to get to as well in like 3 years' time. Like I had a client recently that didn't necessarily need a return solution because of the way that their setup was. But I was like, look, you don't need it today, but just do demos with these 3 so you kind of have an understanding of the landscape, because in time, as you grow and you might, expand eventually, I kind of want you to understand it now so that you have that idea pictured in your head about what that looks like going forward and what the complexity would be. And also, if you're doing a migration, you're probably better doing it now than later on anyway. It'll cost you more. So yeah, I guess it just varies so much, but we would always scrutinize like an apps list or the tech approach to something and try and debate it a little bit internally. But the whole goal is like, do it so it's scalable, do it so it's agile and simple for the customer to use. Does that cover it?
And I was also just going to add, I think it kind of goes back to the first point of understanding the client and the team in detail. Because if you're operating with a small team and a complex merchandising tool is on the table, for example, it might have all the bells and whistles. It might actually, deliver the end goal eventually. But actually, our role is to go in and say, but actually your team is 2 people. You are not going to have the resource capacity internally to utilize or justify spending, a premium on this commercial. A entry point, could be this alternative tool, which was still really powerful. And then in a few years' time, let's see how much you're using it and the data you're getting out of it, etc. So not a few years, sorry, a few years' time. But so for us, I think that's where we have an advantage as well, is that because we've done the pre-discovery and we've got to know the client, we can confidently sit in the room with the dev agency, for example, in the discovery sessions and really be an extension of the team, but with more knowledge, an extension of the client team, but with more technical and e-commerce knowledge as well.
I think it's really important I always say this, that the consultant should be the devil's advocate in the room. Is our role is to help clients and agencies have the best possible outcome to projects and long-term partnership working together, not to get in the way and go, oh, look, don't I know everything? And part of that is, if an agency has only worked with a particular product discovery engine and that's the one they like because I get this, it happens. You find something that works and you like it, you recommend it to other clients. But if you know that that's overkill, I had this recently with ones where it was an enterprise level product discovery where search was the dominant part of the engine, but the client had such basic search queries, it was complete overkill. There's no need for it. And the implementation is fine. You're doing it, but the actual tool configuration setup and management it's a really complex tool in the back end.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And it's having those conversations, say, guys, I'm not entirely sure that's going to be right, but in a collaborative way so that everyone comes out and making a decision together.
Yeah.
And just to add to that as well, I think it's we are agnostic in terms of obviously platforms and partners. So we are open to assessing other options as well, which I think is the important one. A role that I played recently was actually to do an evaluation for a client from a shop. A Shopify perspective. So a new tool has come into the ecosystem. I won't say because it will be too obvious. I won't say what it is, but it was our role to essentially do the assessment for the client in the readiness for Shopify. And I guess from a client perspective, they not used Shopify before, so they're not familiar with all the nuances. So in this case, it was our role to go in and actually unpick exactly whether this would work. And I think that's the advantage as well, that the client actually wouldn't have been able to do that internally. And they might have chosen that tool when actually it's definitely not the right choice.
And we can cut through the noise a lot. I think that's what it is, given the experience and where we sit in the ecosystem as well. We do demos day in, day out for different things as well. And again, it's the way that something's been built could be differ between projects as well. So there's like an enormous amount of experience on this side. So we can confidently give option A, option B, and the why. And like, I love going into projects and seeing like big, expensive tech stacks and saying, you can strip this out, put this in, it's going to do the same job, or here's your compromise. I think you're absolutely fine with that compromise because you're doing X, Y, and Z anyway. So the goal is obviously, let's make the client money, but let's just have the most simplified, agile back end possible that's still going to allow them to grow, but they can use it and they know how to use it. And it's like that kind of variation of a tech stack, or like apps list, for example, is just like perfect. And yeah, it's all about simplifying it and unifying stuff where we can as well. Like you largely want a one size fits all, right? But it's just not possible. But like where we can try and do that, that's what we try to get to at the end of the day.
Yeah, then this one to UAT. Well, in my head, it led me on to UAT anyway, because I'm planning on a big launch at the moment for getting the business aligned. And I see this an area where very few businesses know how to properly do testing because they don't have testing managers. I mean, how many businesses have an internal testing manager? They don't have a consultant who is a testing specialist, and the agencies can be very good at QA, unit testing, and all that piece. They're visual testing their ends, but they are not UAT specialists. And then there is so much to test. But then the critical bit, which gets massively underestimated, is systems testing, process end-to-end order testing, and data flow testing. And that to me is an area where I think independent consultants should be adding a massive amount of value, and I know can, of getting things organized because coming back to your point, Raggy, about soft skills, is it's no good telling people to test. You've got to bring them on a journey, and they've got to feel motivated, and they've got to feel it's manageable, and they've got to understand the process. So what are your viewpoints in terms of where the consultant role should be adding value in a UAT process, and what goes wrong if it's not done properly?
I can start this one.
Yeah.
I've got lots to say.
Go.
Again, another chunky, sizable, upfront discussion to have in ways of working. And we bring this up early doors because you will find a UAT phase in a in a dev agency timeline is essentially 5 days. So they delivered a theme and you get a UAT period of very minimal days to launch the theme and be able to deliver it. You've just mentioned UAT across different systems and data flows, etc. UAT is huge. It's not just about testing the front end of the theme, which is what you'll see in a line item from a dev agency. So I think again, it's an education piece up front to the customer to say, UAT is a massive focus point. We need to make sure that we've got the right team available to be around for UAT when the time comes. Generally with UAT, like what did we used to have before in those like front end sheets? Like again, another 200 line item.
Yeah.
Scenario planning for front end, then like for admin side we'll have another test case piece, but the one that we can do up front, for example, is like something like finance reconciliation testing. So we'll force teams who can test as early as possible to test as early as possible. So systems being set up, any of those connectors will encourage basically early adoption of testing, and as soon as we get the back end of a theme for back end of Shopify or a platform, for example, any of those connections can be tested, API calls can be tested. Let's just get the integrations team set up as early as possible to give them the longest stretch of time to be able to test what they need to test end to end. And then like finance teams as well, bring them up early, because again, you can be testing order files, you can be testing payments in a non-live production staging theme. And when it comes to on-site testing, I mean, that's really where people, I guess, know that there's testing to be done and really focus on just like front end, when it's not all just about front end testing. I don't know how to articulate this one, but the whole end-to-end testing it's usually basically the back end and integration system testing that will block anything to do with the front end anyway. So we encourage that kind of education piece and upfront end-to-end web flows to happen as early as possible with those teams. And then when we do the monthly steer goal, UAT is one of our high risk areas, and it is again making sure that every team is doing their testing as upfront and as early as possible within those scenarios.
And I'll just add that the way that we, I guess, organize all of this is by getting the timelines as soon as possible. So obviously you'll have your timeline from the dev agency. You also need the timeline from the middleware or the systems integrator, whoever is leading the operations and integrations piece. If I have the timelines as early as possible, then I can support in actually making sure that they link up. So for example, a project that we have at the moment, we've actually had to ask the systems integrator to make sure that the product part of the integration is built first, because theirs was actually a little bit later in the process. And as a result, we then asked the dev agency to make sure that the PDP and the product is built first, just to start that testing, like Sham said, as early as possible. So from a boring organization documentation view, it's really important to make sure that you're getting the timelines as soon as possible, and making sure that they line up as well.
Back to you as well, James, because obviously we're a team here, and it takes an army to do a full migration. How do you manage it? What's your kind of, I guess, intended approach, and what generally happens when you're actually actioning it in live?
On UAT specifically. So the way that I do it is I've got a standardized process that I go through, which involves early communication, like you were saying, briefing people. So I've just gone through it with my big project at the moment. We are 2 months from launch. UAT is due to kick off meaningfully in 2 to 3 weeks. I don't vote too early because people forget. But an internal kickoff with all the key people who are involved to tell them what UAT is, what it stands for, what the purpose is, what their role will be, how we'll manage it, where they need to document stuff, and how we'll take the heavy lifting away, all that stuff. So they go, oh, it's a clear process. I know what I'm doing. Then it's weekly comms to update them on the timeline, because we all know that the development pipeline shifts, and all of a sudden, actually, you're not going to be able to test that to the week after. Fine. And then each week I just update and brief people and go, right, next week's testing focus is X. This is your responsibilities. I need the sheet up, the issue log updated by end of the week. And then I have a mini work task group, which will be a couple of stakeholders internally with me to triage. And we will do is this data content issue? We fix it, done.
Yeah.
Back to retest. Or is it a dev ticket? Now we prioritize it based on criteria, and that goes into the usual dev ticketing process. But the bit you touched upon is the critical bit. It's the end-to-end order testing. And I have I've got a working group separate to the UAT team, who are all core systems from ERP down to WMS, any other parties, the analytics bit, CS, where we map out every single order scenario we've got to test and all the system checks. And then it's pass fails, and any order scenario that fails, there has to be a resolution to it, and then it has to be retested.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the dull bit, but it's so bloody important, because you're right. Testing the front end again, doesn't the website look great? Yeah, but you can't ship made to order products. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. I think it's also just, again, because a dev timeline usually gets given up front, and then you just see that line item of like 3 to 5 days for testing typically, and like I'm seeing a typical 24 or 26 week timeline. I think that is, again, a customer doesn't know what they don't know. They've never done this before. And I think the UAT can be hectic unless, you do have that education piece up front and explain the different breakdowns between the different departments and how they can do this in a kind of more like, I guess, an earlier flow, more simplified flow. And the thing that is as well that's usually frustrating, it's like one team could do the majority of the order scenario testing, and everyone else could use that order file to largely validate their sections. But you just, no matter how many times you say it, you usually find like everyone does their own segments of testing. So that same order could be placed like 5 times. And it's just like, just use the one batch of order scenarios, and you'll probably, like 3 of you guys will probably be able to validate your scenarios. But I'm just happy when I see, again, for accountability, to make sure that like order tests are getting done. We make them document in one place, so that then you can see, activity is happening. And when it's not, it's called out as a risk on our weekly anyway. But yeah, it's just, it's forcing people to kind of do stuff up front, and that will really buy time.
Yeah, and for me, UAT is successful when it's clear what the process is, when you divide and conquer, because if you get everyone to do everything, it's a mess. And the other thing I think is really important is to be transparent to people up front and go, look, if you're expecting a pixel perfect website with every bit of data in there, and it's not going to be. Your UAT site is about you breaking stuff. Do not worry about the visual side. That's been handled by like the brand and the design team. Do not worry about the product data. That is still on an ongoing basis. You've got to be very clear to people about what isn't currently done. Because otherwise you get clients going and go, it looks shit, it's off brand, this does, and you've just ruined it because they're in the wrong mental space.
Yeah.
100%.
I could carry on asking you questions all afternoon because I love this topic and I know how much experience you both got, but I'm worried that you both got lives to lead. So I'm gonna finish with a question for you both of you to answer, which is, let's flip this, right? You know, you're an e-commerce business, you're a senior decision maker, you're a head of e-com, whatever it is, and you're looking at a replatform project and you're thinking, it's going to be expensive. If you're considering a consultant, you've got to be able to guarantee that they are delivering value. What are the core skills that an e-com person should be demanding and expecting from a consultant in order to be able to evaluate that they're going to be adding value?
Shall I go?
Go for it.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think this is a really important one. And it's actually a personal one for me because I feel like this is where I have got the most clout with clients. So it's probably...
He's got fan clubs out there.
Probably empathy and understanding is like, and those softer skills are really important. So whether that's from understanding a client's internal challenges, their individual workloads, how they might actually struggle throughout the project, and phasing calls and information so that it kind of suits the time of year that they're going through. So for example, if a project obviously doesn't allow for this, then it's unfortunate. But usually what I will try and do is actually phase the information to who I'm giving it to, based on the understanding I have of them and the team. And I think that's really important. The next thing from that is definitely the ability to interpret a client's needs versus their wants. So more often than not, a client will say, we need this as a department or as a company. And it is our role to be intuitive and actually decipher whether that is a true need and whether it's going to move the needle for them, or whether it's just a want because it's something that they've been fighting for internally for ages. And this is finally an opportunity for them to get it. So we will usually, and again, the requirements gathering phase, the pre-discovery is where we would pick this out. But being able to understand the difference between those two and listen to the client is super important, rather than just going in all guns blazing and do like a cookie cutter approach as to how it should be.
I do just want to say off the back of that, like, as simple as that sounds, it's really, I think that's one of our like magic skill sets. They're paying us to cut through the noise as well, right? And I think it takes an enormous amount of trust from their side to allow us to, give option A and option B based on our experience. I think that's quite it's quite telling from both sides. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest value add areas that Vervaunt hold.
I like that though, because I think it's really important that you have to have commercial acumen. You've got to have the gravitas to be able to influence across all the different levels, and you've got to have that depth of understanding of an end-to-end project and what are the risks and what goes wrong and how to minimize that. But fundamentally, it's about people. People deliver projects. The tech's there to be used, but if you don't have people, you don't get any outcomes. And if you can't bring people on journeys, if you can't motivate people to care about the project and deliver, you're going to fail. So I fully agree. I think that's so important. And it is a real skill set. You're right, because not everyone can do it. People can be amazingly smart, but not great at articulating and communicating. You've got to have the communication. You've got to know what triggers each person. And some people are very defensive and very insular and need different ways of management than somebody who's naturally like, oh God, that's wrong, let's fix it.
Yeah. Also, just not being constant yes people on our side, right? We have to be able to pinpoint decisions and do the best version of a choice based on all the knowledge that we have and the goal that they're trying to get to, right? There's decisions that the reason that you're hiring us as well is to be able to, again, cut through the noise, make those decisions for you, to not delay timeline and to not increase budget. We're there to deliver something, and it's based on our experience. We're able to kind of drive that the speed that we do drive it, because we do complete complex projects in like what was OCA? 9 months?
Yes. No,
Like,
yeah.
insane. If you go on that OCA website, insane. The complexity behind that project, insane. The quality of delivery, insane. And it was delivered in 9 months. Like that, I dread to think if you took that to,
It's a bit less.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, an external, external kind of bigger consultant group, I don't know how long that would have taken. But yeah, it's insane how much you can actually get delivered with the right team and the right kind of accountability and the right trust in a team to be able to build something and get it out the door.
And I also think it's not just about, sorry, James, you're going to say something.
No, go, please.
It's not just about the internal team as well. It's actually the third parties that you could be working with. So, for example, your analytics agency, SEO, etc. It's also about being able to pull people in at the right time, having those relationships with those people. Sometimes you're on a call, an all agency call, and there's 20 stakeholders who all have their own individual needs and requirements and goals, etc. And I think it is a skill to be able to hold a room there and actually get the information that you need out of specific people. And as you get to the end of a project, obviously you're preparing for launch, etc. Those calls actually, get more frequent. And if you have the buy-in from the beginning of the project, so much smoother to be able to ask, the SEO agency to hop on a quick call because we need to variate something. If you don't actually engage and communicate from the start, then that just becomes very, very tricky. And then that's where certain things start to fall down.
Yeah, I think that's it. I often, for anyone who's watched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's the Babel fish, which is...
Yeah, that one.
That's because you're not as old as me, that's why. The Babel fish is this thing that you put in your ear and it can instantly translate every language in the galaxy. And to me, that is what a consultant is, because you have to be able to talk to a CEO, a CFO, and you've got to be able to give them credible evidence, and you've got to be honest with them if things are going wrong, why they're going, what the impact is, answer their questions, deal with them when there's you've got to manage the project lead, you've got to manage the stakeholders, you've got to talk to an SEO agency, an analytics agency, third-party technology companies, developers, business development people. You've got all these different things, and that requires different types of communication, different frequencies and different formats. And that to me is the art of it. It's you've got to be able to get on with people, and you've got to be able to smooth through problems when there are conflicts, rather than getting uppity and making it all about politics.
Yeah. And just one last one, which is, of course, I'm going to say this. I think attention to detail is something which is kind of overlooked, I guess, or joked about sometimes, but it is super important. And the reason why I say that is because, again, you are across hundreds of documents, and one small mistake on one can ricochet and actually be, of a huge impact in the end. So not being overwhelmed by reading through, a lot of information, picking out, where the gaps are, etc. I think that does take a certain kind of person as well. And I think luckily we do have a team of those here.
100%. At the end of the day, we brought it back to we need to have an element of dullness in you in order to make these projects work.
Exciting.
Yes. Frank, I love this. I could carry on discussing this for hours. I think we all know we can do that. But
I've got one last question for you, though.
It's not all about you.
No, I've got one last question for you. Go then. When do you think you don't need a consultant? So I like that question.
So I think if the project is really simple and it's just a theme, regardless of whether you're a Shopify, BigCommerce, and there are interests. So I had a client actually who would move into Shopify from a custom build on Woo several years back. And there was zero integration. They have no ERP, no WMS. They literally manually manage the orders and have somebody in a small warehouse who basically logs in, takes an order and processes and updates it.
Come on, the amount of projects that you've been doing that now, there's no simple project anymore.
No, but I'm saying there are some projects when there's no, the value they had for me was advise and guide them on what they need to think about, how they need to run a project, and decision path. They didn't need a consultant in there because I found them the right agency. And which was GPMD, Mark, Stakeholder team, who are really good at doing, because they're a build agency, but they're very collaborative in the process. They had the skills they needed and the capabilities in the project without a consultant, and they better spending the money on the development side. So that's one scenario. I think in a more complex project, it would be if they are a business, and I've worked with some large businesses like House of Fraser who have a fully resourced PMO office in there where they have BAs, PMs, and true program managers who have experience of running multi-threaded projects and managing the project office and managing stakeholders and doing all the documentation. And so they have the expertise of project delivery and they have e-commerce expertise within that. And if they have strong e-com leaders across the core parts of the business, like there was a very strong director for e-com, very strong head of merchandising, very strong head of digital marketing, then actually, yes, you can help, but sometimes you don't need that external person anymore because you've got the coordination in there. It's hard. I mean, the one thing that you don't get then is you don't get the challenge. You don't get but you're doing it like that, but why? That's probably not the right way of doing it. So the risk you get is you repeat some of this is how we do it now, but within a new ecosystem. So I think you can get away with it. It doesn't mean that you do it perfectly by getting away with it.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about our ICP and the types of clients that we generally tend to work with, the size of brand that we tend to work with, I honestly find it mind-boggling that somebody, some of these teams, they might not necessarily have the budget for us, right? And they know they need to do the projects, so they might try and wing it internally. And the thought of that is just, considering the complexities in it, is just a bit, it's crazy to think that somebody would be able to take that on and deliver something to spec. But then I guess this is where our value comes in, right? It's the intentional delivery of something that's actually not MVP. And I think, when a lot of brands deliver a version of their site, it's very much, in my opinion, like an 80% site. Whereas I think what we end up doing is launching a site with we call it bells and a number of whistles, but it'll be at least 92% complete. And, all that's missing on the front end is maybe a bit of content and less priority content. But I don't feel comfortable launching a site without even having the blogs on. And that's how ready kind of we prepare a team to launch and launch for. So yeah, as hectic as our projects boards might feel and be, I guess, in the whole process, I think our customers end up launching with a version of a site that's really ready to trade. And, there's not this ongoing 3-month retainer just to polish off the site. We tend to, leave it at a very, very polished version for launch, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's always my ambition, but there are some times when it can't happen because the client wants to get live at a point where you cannot deliver that level. And it is hard because I'm with you that conversation happens up front of, okay, if you've got to go live by month X, and this is the likely compromises you are going to have to make for launch, are you willing to accept yes or no? And often people go, yeah. And when it gets to it, they don't really want to have made those compromises, but they've made a decision. So,
Thanks, James, for having us. And I've
loved it. And for anyone listening, I highly recommend, if you aren't already connected to and don't already follow what Frankie and Sham are up to, you should do. Connect with them. Their contact details are on the landing page. They are brilliant people to know in the industry generally. And obviously, make sure you're going to the Pulse event it's May, isn't it? Yeah, it is. But God, it's next month, because they'll be there as well the rest of the Vervaunt team, and you can chat to them a lot more.
Yeah, please do. And definitely sign up for Pulse in the background. I think people forget to actually register, and then we find a heap of new people on the day of. But yeah, no, thank you for having us, James. Yeah, we could talk about this for hours, and I'm not sure how helpful this is for anyone else, but reach out if you have any other questions.
Thanks, James.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast, hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.